Hey everyone, here's another episode of Let's Cover That. I'm Will Sullivan.
And I'm Antonina Aguruza. And today we have with us Pete Reilly of Hub International. Pete, we are so excited to have you here with us today.
Oh, well, thank you. It's great to be here. I love this kind of stuff and should be fun.
Awesome. Well, Pete is the North American Healthcare Practice Leader and Chief Sales Officer of Hub International. Pete, can you tell us a little bit about your background in healthcare and what led you to Hub International?
Sure. Sad to date myself, but I started in the insurance business in 1988. Started out on the claim side of the insurance industry and found that I was really good at spending other people's money. So they quickly moved me out of that and found my way onto the insurance brokerage side, which was really, I thought, the most exciting part of our business, where we get to play the what if game for our clients on any one of a number of issues. Really got into healthcare in late 1989, putting my hand up in the middle of a meeting about who wanted to specialize in the healthcare industry. And did that because, in part, healthcare to me is not only such a big part of our economy, both in the US and Canada, really any part of Western Europe, honestly, but because it's changing in a very dynamic field. The way we practice medicine today is significantly different from how we did it even 10 years ago, let alone 30, and sort of fell into it in that respect. I joined Hub just a little under 2 years ago, in part because while our industry has grown significantly in size and there are now some massive brokers who are of very high quality all over the world, Hub has, I think, a pretty unique culture, very entrepreneurial, very inquisitive, and really driven by the term innovation and insurance don't often go together, but really around finding solutions to the client's problems and making the insurance fit the business rather than vice versa. And so working with a number of former friends who had been with prior firms, Johnson and Higgins, for those who've been around long enough to know what that firm was, they called and asked if I was interested. And after making several unreasonable demands, they met them. And so here I am. And really have been enjoying it a great deal.
Awesome. Yeah, Pete, it's amazing having you on here, working with you with Hub Healthcare at CMF Group. You're an amazing resource and a great partner on the team. And one of the things I think is really interesting for us, kind of working with nurses, for over 70 years now, and one of the questions I think is, timely to ask you is, we have the most recent Radonda Vaught case, which for everybody who's listening who hasn't heard about it, but it's a criminal action against her, and taken up most recently. She was working for Vanderbilt. But stepping away from the case per se, I think it's better to understand what are the implications from your perspective, not necessarily from insurance, but you have a risk management background, you have a healthcare background, you're working from everybody to small business groups to large health systems. What are the implications you see that this case has, not just nursing, but just the health system overall in our country?
Well, I mean, it's a great question and one that's going to have lots of iterations, quite frankly, and we can peel back this onion in lots of ways. I think first and foremost, it's going to have a chilling effect, primarily for nurses and other allied professionals, because in an industry that has historically been very hierarchical, when the doctor dictates what the course of treatment is going to be, it is then sort of dictated down and to be followed very carefully. And if errors or mistakes are made within that process, it rises back up to that individual, the doctor, who has directed the care. And leaving aside some of the facts of this particular case, the criminal charges that were brought against this individual, I think, are going to bring about three pretty significant changes within really the course of treatment. And this is now very micro in terms of the care. Number one, I think a lot of nurses are going to be suspect of what sort of backing they're going to get either from their medical doctor or their respective institution. And that's tough because a significant majority of actual delivery of care in this country is made or brought about by nurses. So that's number one. Number two, I think it's going to bring about some concern on the part of nurses or other allied professionals to speak up when they've made a potential error. either from sheer bad luck, or, as in this case, an individual overrode some protocols. But they were trying to do, I think, from what I know, trying to provide care to the patient. And so I think there's going to be a real concern of these individuals who then don't want to speak up. They're going to be afraid. And I think that's going to be concerning for the providers and the institutions. And the third piece to this that I haven't read too much about or heard too much about yet, and I'm certainly not implying I've thought of it first, but as patients learn about this case, they're going to worry that if a nurse or other allied professional makes a mistake, someone is going to know about it. And they may start down that slippery slope of having a bad outcome. And bad outcomes happen in medicine all the time. It's just the nature of the beast. But I think it could have a very chilling effect with the patients to say, hey, wait a minute, did they make a mistake? They're all of a sudden huddling around things. It's going to raise doubt in the midst of an industry where we, as the consumer, patient, really don't want that, especially when there's any serious, life-threatening disease, illness, or injury. And so I think you can even pull the threads on those respective lines of thought, and it's going to have a chilling effect on how people trust medicine. I think that's probably the easiest way to sum it up.
How much of it, when you think about this, Pete, through your tenure, especially starting with the risk management piece, and you start to look backwards and you look at the Institute of Medicine, the IONMs, to err is human, and just the genesis of risk management within healthcare, really going from like airplanes into healthcare,
Yeah.
broadening out the transparency within the health system, to your second point, like the huddling of people getting together after errors, intended or unintended. I mean, how much of a chilling effect does it have on that end of just saying, do we feel comfortable, putting the provider at the center of the care and actually feeling like they can get it done without, really terrible ramifications upon them personally on these things. So, what do you see? We've made this evolution and now we have this instance. Does that take us back? And, are people concerned about that?
Yes. That's exactly right, Phil. Will, you said two things that I think were really important. Number one, healthcare is like an airplane. It's supposed to have a sort of a fail-safe system. It's supposed to be systemic and process-driven. And when that is deviated from, there are potentially awful outcomes. It's easy to see when an airplane doesn't perform well, and equally tragic. But I do think it takes us back, that you're going to introduce doubt into a very inexact science, despite the incredible advancements of medicine, from simple take-home remedies to the most advanced surgical care. You begin to introduce doubt to the entire doctor-patient relationship, and really provider-patient relationship, because you have to include the allied professionals. And it would be somewhat akin to, do you trust the pilot to fly the plane? And if you don't, are you going to get on that plane? And then the ripples that has, if you're back to healthcare, if you're not going to get proper care for, disease or illness, arthritis, something as simple as it can become debilitating and have much wider impact into society, the economy, et cetera, et cetera. And while we as insurance professionals can protect against only a part of that and try to feed into the clinical efforts of risk management, checklist culture, if you will, to make sure you've followed each particular procedure. If you've introduced doubt that, hey, someone could be fudging that particular checklist, I think it's going to have potential ramifications, again, around that patient-provider relationship that is not good for either healthcare and certainly not the patients and society.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, Pete. Do you think that there are any solutions to kind of fill this gap or this void in the healthcare system?
Oh, How much time do we have? And that's a really tough question, Antonina, because I think it goes, again, in so many different directions. And I think what is so fascinating about the Vaught case is you can go down the legal road, societal road, healthcare, it goes on and on and on, and certainly into the finance of healthcare. I think I think there almost has to be, because of this case, somewhat of a return to uh, a checklist culture that really cannot be deviated from in order to prevent this type of awful outcome. Even in the best of circumstances, some of the most gifted medical providers in the world will go through all the right steps and again, checklist procedure while doing a surgery, and you can still have a bad outcome. That's usually healthcare risk management speak for patient died, or there was some unintended consequence. And so I think you're likely to see a pushback, or should I say a return to very rigid, clinically driven checklists. And I'm using that word intentionally, that it becomes a very methodical approach to delivery of care. That can sometimes be impersonal. And so, again, I'm not sure the patients will always like that, but I can see that as an outcome because, at least at the core of this particular case, you have a nurse who somehow circumvented those procedures, and therefore the reaction is going to be, how do you stop that? You make it unallowable. And the unintended consequence of that is sometimes for a medical provider, doctor, nurse, CNA, whomever they are, may need to do something outside of the norm to save a patient that they know is right, but it's not in the checklist. There may be a reluctance to do that. But I think that return to a more systemic delivery of care is likely to be one reaction, and I think it'll be the most common reaction from both institutions and individuals.
Yeah, it's an interesting shift, especially for the culture perspective. Even though it's one case, you go from the shift in the culture of transparency and trust, which is really generating a culture like day to day with people having the autonomy to make decisions when they have to that might
Yep.
be outside of a driven checklist perspective. It's kind of command and control versus building the culture that you need to sustain appropriate quality of care. And it really like kind of starts to mix the two with a good pendulum effect, or I guess a poor pendulum effect, so to speak. But hopefully we get back where we need to go on it. Kind of jumping from that, Pete, and into your role within Hub Healthcare, I think it would be meaningful, as we're kind of looking at the gaps within healthcare specifically. What do you see on the horizon for you and Hub Healthcare, and what you guys have for major milestones or partnerships that you think would be exciting to know about?
Well, Will, there's so much going on within the use of technologies, and we still sit here in the midst of a global pandemic, which has created so many negative headlines and unnecessary, I think, political strife where it shouldn't have been. But I think on the flip side of that coin, we see, and one of the things we're very excited about as we sit here as risk advisors, is one, the increased use of virtual care, telehealth, the digital technologies. Our ability to sit here and communicate over this podcast in different parts of the country and effectively deliver information. Well, that same tool can be used in the delivery of most forms of healthcare, and having the technology keep up with that is going to be a lot of fun to watch, because we are so much farther ahead than where we were, again, even 5 years ago. Add to that, rightly or wrongly, the speed with which we developed the various vaccines around the coronavirus was absolutely remarkable, and give credit where credit is due. The way industry stepped up to embrace the use of the mRNA technology was really nothing short of unbelievable, while at the same time having its roots in good old-fashioned vaccine development. And that entire technology is remarkable. And now we're even, and I believe it's Pfizer that has a pill that you can take. And so in a very short period of time, and what really started in my mind was around March 13th or March 20th of 2020 to where we sit today, the delivery of effective medicines and care around a global pandemic is utterly astounding. And that's going to be exciting to watch, because I think actually the delivery of healthcare is having to catch up with the technology, because you hear the sad stories of vaccines expiring and no longer being usable. Well, we need to increase the willingness of patients to receive a vaccine. I know there's always going to be skeptics, and some very justifiably so, but the ability of society to accept what was once x-rays were thought to be fake and not real, and all the things we now take for granted, to see how this evolution is going to happen around the current world is going to be exciting and fun to watch. I also think we're going to see, and while the Vaught case is going to, I think, have some unintended consequences around those going into nursing, at least in the near term, we are seeing a greater delivery of care through, PAs and, other healthcare professionals who can do a lot of the work, the more fundamental clinical delivery of care that may not be needed in a doctor. That's going to open up a whole new field, I think, for the specialization within that particular world. And you guys know nurses as well as I, and all the classifications thereof. Those are going to be a whole new body of knowledge to come of this, and we're going to refine that even further. And I think that's going to be good for a lot of rural communities. They're going to allow them to remain viable places to live and work, which I think may bring back, now hopping into healthcare economics, potentially the ability of critical access hospitals or federally qualified health centers to deliver some solid care, and they already do, but only to do more effectively in those communities that desperately need it. And then lastly, I think one of the most interesting components that we're seeing in the healthcare finance world, and this is exclusive to the United States, is the move towards value-based care. And now we could do another 2-hour podcast on something like that. But that's going to raise a whole different, not only financial pressure, but financial opportunity to improve the delivery of care, and really take something in this awful case that happened in Tennessee and try to get out from under some of the pressures that I think healthcare delivery feels, that the fee-for-service, that you have to deliver the medicine in order to get paid for it. It's going to take away some of that disincentive financially. Fee-for-service is great, but you have to deliver the service to get paid. Sometimes, and not saying it was in this case, but sometimes the best thing to do in medicine is to wait just a little longer and see, and not be that rush to service. Value-based care, I think, is going to change the reimbursement model, but it's also going to change how physicians think about the delivery of care. Sorry about that. Hope you can edit out the phone.
Yeah.
It is still a work office, I'm sorry to say. So that's a long-winded answer, Will, to your question, because you can really run it in several different directions. And at least in my mind, a lot of what's on the horizon as a result of this case and the result of the pandemic, a result of the technologies, I put them in sort of 3 general buckets. The financial side of it, certainly value-based care and how we're going to pay for medicine. The operational side of it, all the technologies and the vaccines and other med device that are going to allow for a better delivery of care. And then, the strategic side being, can you have medical staff who do not have to be doctors per se, who can go out into the communities and deliver that care in an overall organizational structure that makes sense? And again, all of those I think are very interesting and complex questions. And from a risk standpoint, again, I am a insurance broker and risk advisor. What risks do those bring about that didn't exist 10 years ago? And we have to think about what maybe they're in 2 to 3 years.
That is super insightful, Pete, and we really appreciate having you on the podcast today. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And sadly, I could probably go on, but there are time limitations to everybody.
I think we might have to have another episode for value-based care, Pete. I think that's. I think you left us on the cliffhanger there. You know, we can get
Love to
that
do
one on the
it.
timeline. Thank you so much, and amazing work that you're doing, advising your clients across the country and in Canada as well. So thank you.
Thanks to you both. This was good fun, and I hope everybody is safe and be well.